Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Evie House, and I'm the Program Specialist at Be Active Kids. Today we welcome Christine Roberts from Nurturing Pathways. Christine is the founder of Nurturing Pathways, a creative dance program providing comprehensive development for infants to 4-year-olds. Christine's message is that movement is the gateway for learning, and she is able to reach thousands of people annually. She has been a featured speaker with the National Association for the Education of Young Children, National Head Start Association, and 0 to 3 National Training Institute. She is also a developmental movement educator through body-mind centering and certifies instructors in her Nurturing Pathways program. Welcome, Christine.
Welcome, and welcome to all of you who are listening today, and thank you for that introduction. So today I just want to talk to you about getting the year off to a healthy start for young children and the importance of it being a win-win for all of us, for teachers, for parents, and especially for the children and infants that we serve. Next slide. So the research is clear, as John Ratey says in his wonderful book, The User's Guide to the Brain, that movement is crucial to every other brain function. So the question that I have asked myself is, what does the brain do? And how does it grow? And what is the things that are going on, especially in the first 4 years, that are different from the rest of the time in a child's life? Next slide. So when we understand that the brain development is undergoing a rapid and a highly malleable time and phase, we can appreciate the importance of early movement experiences. And interestingly enough, our brain is the only organ that does change its structure and function due to the demands placed on it by the environment. So an important thing to keep in mind is the brain is built on demand. If the demand is not present, then the brain does not build the capacity to fulfill that need. So you can think of the brain as basically being lazy, and if it doesn't feel the need to have that capacity, then it goes without. So very important concept to keep in mind throughout our webinar today is that the brain is built on demand. Next slide. So an infant's brain doubles in the first year. The brain at birth weighs 1 pound and it doubles in size. And by the time they blow out their candles on their first birthday cake, it's doubled to 2 pounds. And by the age of 4, they have 95% of their adult brain weight. So this is the highly malleable nature of the brain during these early years that is unique and stands alone in the season and time in a child's life for laying a foundation for all future lifelong learning skills. Next slide, please. Next slide. There we go. So Jane Ayres, who we refer to her as the mother of sensory processing, she is the one who discovered and who really gave us a new vision of the brain and how the brain functions and the importance of sensory motor processing to the overall success and function of the brain for lifelong learning. So you can see here in this diagram that 80% of the brain is dedicated to processing sensory motor experiences. That would be what we see, what we touch, what we hear, how we move, and just that purple part in the front, that 20%, that is there for us to problem solve, to negotiate a to-do list, to negotiate relationships, but that doesn't come online until a child hits 6 to 7 years of age. So these early years we are building the brain from the bottom to the top, from the back to the front, and we are laying down and forming all the connections that are going to make up their sensory motor systems. Next slide, please. So here you can see the prime time for these windows of development, and you can note that most of them occur in that precious season from 0 to 2 years. We get a 5-year window to develop our movement capacities. Auditory, we get 4 years, And the rest, how well we touch, how well we hold ourselves with postural tone and support, and how well our eyes function, those things are all laid down and all the connections are created in the first 2 years of life. Next slide, please. So one of my teachers at Body Mind Centering, he had a wonderful way of putting this into terms to help us appreciate how this is such an essential and formative time in a child's life. He states, it is in the first year of life that we learn how to learn and establish a basic perceptual framework. In this formative time, our strengths and perceptions grow through movement patterns that integrate all of our body systems. And I am looking forward to showing you what these movement patterns are, how we can strengthen them, fun activities we can do to reinforce them, to strengthen them, and to integrate them because of the profound impact they have on establishing this basic capacity of learning how to learn. Next slide, please. John Naisbitt is a futurist and an author, and he says in a very succinct way, and I think we can all relate to this as we all are constantly changing in relationship to technology, that there is no one subject or set of subjects that's going to serve any of us in the foreseeable future. But the greatest skill that can be acquired is to learn how to learn. So that really speaks to me about the importance of this early season in an infant and toddler's life to create this strong capacity for perceiving, processing incoming stimuli and having an organized response to that stimuli. That is the foundation for learning how to learn. Next slide, please. So I'm really excited to be visiting all of you as the keynote at the 5th Annual Early Childhood Physical Activity Institute to share with you the 6 sensory motor building blocks that are how we develop and how we organize and put together those beautiful sensory motor systems you saw in the brain model during the first 5 years. There are 6 essential building blocks, and those have activities and specific structured activities that we can do with each one to improve. As we recall, the brain is built on demand, to improve the brain's ability to respond to those demands and be ready for learning and ready for school. Next slide. There is a wonderful, wonderful organization called the Center on the Developing Child out of Harvard University, and they have put it so well how everything happens in sequential scaffolding, first this, then that, and it's very important that these 6 building blocks that I'm going to share with you are the actual foundation for laying on all the future cognitive capacities of language and social emotional intelligence and our ability to regulate ourselves with ourselves and use our self-regulation to be successful, to set goals, and all of these things. They all come from this strong foundation of establishing our sensory motor system and putting that in place in the first 5 years of our lives. So let me read this to you. Brain architecture is built over a succession of sensitive periods, each of which is associated with the formation of specific circuits that are associated with specific abilities. The development of increasingly complex skills and their underlying circuits builds on the circuits and skills that were formed earlier. Through this process, early experiences create a foundation for lifelong learning, behavior, and both physical and mental health. That is a very big package that includes all of who we are, and the opportunity to share this information with you, you'll understand how this has an impact on us emotionally, it has an impact on our self-esteem, it has an impact on our perception of who we are and what we're capable of. So it really comes and is derived from these 6 sensory motor building blocks. Next slide, come. Next slide. So interesting enough, in our country right now, we're seeing an enormous issue with a sedentary generation, which is having, as we know and are probably aware of, a very adverse effect on our children's ability to move and their ability to enjoy themselves physically and to feel agile and strong and able and capable. And you can see here that we are spending enormous amounts of money. $1 out of $5 are going to be spent by the end of next year on medical care related exclusively to obesity. David Satcher sadly made this statement last year that we have the most sedentary generation of young people in American history. Next slide. In addition to this, we also have an era of children who are being put in front of screens at excessively young ages and in an excessive number of forms, from phones to tablets to iPads to TVs. The accessibility and the variability is making them very intrusive on a young child's life and their ability to use their bodies and be active in play, active in sensory motor activities, and not be left in a passive and a situation in which the brain is not getting stimulated in all those lobes to build those strong connections first thing in life. Next slide. So unfortunately, we're seeing a definite effect that this has on the attentional system in the brain. We're getting to see that our infants are suffering in their language acquisition and their ability to build strong vocabulary skills and language interaction skills. All of these things are impacted with the amount of screen time a child is exposed to early in life. And we need to be very aware that with just 1 hour of play and fun and using sensory motor props and using our bodies, we create a 30% buffer against these types of attentional disorders. So the brain is very forgiving as long as we use it. Next slide. An interesting statistic that came out of the Kaiser Family Foundation shows that when you start screen time early in life, it grows and it grows and it grows. And right now in our current population, between 8 years and 18 years of age, that age group is spending 10 3/4 hours in front of screens of some kind. So we can see that early exposure leads to a greater appetite and increases the desire to spend more time in front of screens, which is why we want to interrupt that and be proactive and provide stimulating, engaging, and physically active things for our children to do, so they would choose that rather than be sedated in front of a screen. Next slide. So once children hit school aged, they find themselves sitting for long periods of time. In this country, we have all but eliminated recess and have left them just with 30 minutes for lunch. But interestingly, when you look at the research on sitting and the effects of sitting on us, it is being considered a health hazard at this point. And certainly for a young child whose brain is still undergoing rapid development, this would be particularly true and particularly adverse for their overall global well-being. So you can see here from the Health June 16, 2014 Newsweek article that it's being referred to as the new smoking. Next slide, please. So here's a list, and if you know of any children who exhibit any of these behaviors, this conference is definitely for you. You will find answers to these issues, and they lie in our physical activity, our physical well-being, and the types of activities that we do. Next slide. So you can prevent a host of sensory sensitivities, and you can resolve these hindrances if you learn to incorporate structured movement activities into your daily routines in the classroom and you're using them consistently throughout the day. And so I want to encourage you to come and learn what those fun-filled activities are and reap the benefits of movement for the mind. It is a win-win all the way around. Everybody feels better. Next slide. So the list goes on. You can see that there is an endless set of sensory imbalances, sensory processing disorders that occur when the brain can't properly organize incoming stimuli and make sense out of it and give an organized response back out. The disruptions show up in a variety of different ways. Next slide. So the good news is that you can definitely offset this laundry list of sensory sensitivities with movement. Structured movement increases the rate of learning. It wakes up our brain. It gives our attentional system a huge boost so that we can hold attention for a much longer period of time. And what's interesting about the brain is it uses the same neurons for thinking as for doing. So if you set up an obstacle course in your toddler classroom every day for them to work their way through, those are the same neurons that child will be using later on to learn how to read and follow a sentence and go through sequential language sequences. Those are the same neurons we move to go through physical sequences like obstacle courses. So very, very true. The brain's built on demand. The more we move, the better we think. And we release all kinds of important chemicals to help the brain grow. Next slide. So I encourage you to give babies and children the benefits of movement and watch their behavior improve, watch their attention to task increase, and their overall health and stamina grow. Next slide. So let us consider that physical development, like language development, flourishes with developmentally appropriate input that works with the baby and child's abilities, interests, and the brain in mind. And to bring out the best, we have to understand the global importance of physical development and master movement activities that have been planned with science in mind. And this is a very exciting, very fun, very easy to apply, very simple, and has profound impacts that will improve school readiness globally for the child. Next slide. So I'm looking forward to answering this when we meet in May, and that is, what can we do for healthy sensory motor development? We will have fun answering that question. Next slide. So Marian Diamond, in her wonderful book, The Magic Trees of the Mind, she put it very succinctly. Childhood is a particularly crucial time for the brain because of the neural sculpting that goes on. For many of our abilities, tendencies, talents, and reactions, those that get hardwired in childhood become the collective mental platform upon which we stand and grow for the rest of our lives. It's good to take that in and to think about the fact that you, as the child's caregiver, teacher, parent, are making and building brains every day with the young infants and the young children that are in your life. Next slide. So Lise Elliott, from her book, What's Going On in There, I think she states it well. If children are so greatly malleable, then the best way to ensure a great society is by improving the environment of its youngest members. That starts with those newborn infants, right from the beginning. And the Foundation for Early Learning from Seattle, Washington, says it best when they say, if you could change the beginning, you change the whole story. And when I read these words, it is a profound call to action, because it's going to be a time in the child's life when the impact is going to have its greatest lasting effects. So I encourage you to join me in May to discover the enormous potential physical activity can have on changing the whole story for the better. It's going to be fun, it's going to be exciting, and you're going to feel terrific and really enthusiastic about bringing the best to children and giving them what they need when they need it at a time they need it the most. Thank you.
Christine, that was awesome. We are so excited to have you back here in May at the Early Childhood Physical Activity Institute. I don't think May can get here quick enough. We're excited about learning more about sensory motor development, as well as sharing that information with our providers across the state. We have a couple questions. And as we think about physical activity and sensory motor development, what is the #1 suggestion you would give to a parent or provider concerning the environment they have for their young child as they learn about physical activity and as they learn in general? What would you say the #1 suggestion is?
The #1 suggestion I would have is provide an environment that allows ample opportunities to move. So get the containers, get the babies out of the containers, get the toddlers into open spaces where they can have the freedom to explore safely their world around them, but they have room to move, room to interact with good sensory materials, musical instruments, things that they can use, that they can touch, that they can hear, that they can feel, and things that move and encourage them to do the same.
Great. And that kind of leads us into our next question. At the Active Kids, we use a lot of loose parts. And sometimes we have providers or parents that are unsure about the use of loose parts, whether it's safe, whether regulations would allow it. How do you feel about using loose parts, cardboard boxes, pool noodles, different materials that are not your traditional equipment to help develop that sensory understanding, that sensory development? How do you feel about using those kind of items?
I think it's fantastic to find things that are within your environment already that are safe for an infant to mouth, for example, or for a toddler to tinker with. Anything from the pans in your drawer to building an obstacle course out of the furniture in the house, things to go under, things to go around, things to go between. And I think that it's important for children to have cardboard boxes and things that have no right or wrong way to interact with them, that are going to give them the opportunity to develop their creative thinking skills. So I recommend that when there's things in the environment where there's only one way to play with it, it's a closed-ended prop. And that would be, an example of that would be, you push a button and a light goes on, or you push a button and music plays. What we want to do is give children open-ended things like scarves that they can very safely play with, dance with, put in their mouth. They can feel them, they can interact with them, and there's a multitude of different ways they can interact with them, and there's no right or wrong. It's completely open-ended. That is going to build their sensory motor capacities and their creative thinking skills all at the same time.
Perfect. We have children of our own, and I remember having a cardboard box that lasted for over a year. So
Yeah.
definitely open-ended is the way to go. We completely agree. And thinking of open-ended in nature, how do you feel that sensory motor development can occur in nature? Do you and help enhance their physical activity, their physical development? What's the best outdoor environment or nature aspect that you think helps to develop that area?
I think it's absolutely vital and essential that every child have access to a really good playground where there's climbing equipment, where there's swings, where there's opportunities for them to be in the out of doors and experience the light and the smell and the sounds. And it is one of the best places to develop a robust sensory motor system. And I believe that every child needs a good daily trip to the out of doors in order to stimulate their senses and to develop their senses so that they can develop some acuity and have an awareness of their environment around them. And that's going to be developed through exposure. And when we get into step into the out of doors, we're immediately exposed to all of the elements that are there, which is very stimulating for the whole brain. So I'm a huge advocate of outdoor time in every sort of weather.
Perfect. And we have one more question, and that goes back to the sensory processing disorder, or children that might have some of those issues, or the problems that you talked about earlier in your presentation. As a provider, having to oversee, 10, 15, maybe 20 kids, what would you say are some good activities that can include everyone? Children that are your typical children, and then children that also have some sensory issues. What are activities that can help everybody develop, but everybody can do it together?
Well, that's what's great about this 6 sensory motor building blocks that I'm going to be sharing in May, and that is that it is a win-win for everybody in the classroom, the care provider included, and they are activities that are as simple as muscle resistant, pushing things, pulling things, lifting things, activities that all the children in classroom can participate. And then what's wonderful about that is for those who may need more intensity and more frequency, once they have those tools and they know what to do, then they can go access them on their own and use them as a way to help them regulate and to help them overcome their sensory sensitivities.
Great. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this webinar, and I hope everyone else did as well. We will ask that if you have any additional questions, please put them in the comment box or the question area, and we will have Christine answer them at a later date. We appreciate your time. And I'm
Thank you.
glad to advance quick. If you have questions that you want to write directly to Christine, you can do so at her email or check her website out. And then you can also contact us at Be Active Kids.